Only mode.
Hello, my name is Brittany Kavinsky and I want to welcome everyone. It is now 1 p.m. so we will begin our presentation shortly. Today on Friday, April 27th, we will have our presentation on preserving affordable housing in a transit corridor given by Iams and Anita Morrison. For help during today's webcast, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box found in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen or call 1-800-263-6317. For content questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box and we will be able to answer those at the end of the presentation during the question and answer session. Here's a list of the sponsoring chapters, divisions, and universities. I would like to thank all of the participating chapters, divisions, and universities for making these webcasts possible, as well as thank our sponsoring chapter today, the Economic Development Division. As you can see, we have quite a few webcasts coming up in the next few months. To register for these upcoming webcasts, please visit www.utah-apa.org/webcasts and register for your webcast of choice. We also have some distance education webcasts available to help you get your ethics or law credits. These webcasts are available to view at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive, and then just follow the instructions on how to log your distance education CM credits. You can also follow us on Twitter at Planning Webcast or like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on the Planning Webcast Series sponsored by chapters, divisions, and universities. To log your credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/cm, select today's date, which is Friday, April 27th, and then select today's webcast, which is Preserving Affordable Housing in a Transit Corridor. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. We are also recording today's webcast, and it will be available along with a PDF of the presentation at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. And at this time, I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Shayna Johnson, who will introduce our speakers for today.
Thank you. On behalf of the Economic Development Division, the sponsor of today's webinar, I'd like to welcome all of our attendees. I would encourage you all to learn more about the division by visiting us on the web, our blog, or interacting with us on Twitter. And if you like what you hear today, I hope that you'll consider attending another one of our upcoming webinars. We have one on July 20th on town centers and the conditions that lead to their success or their non-success in some cases. And a webinar coming up in late October, October 19th, that's somewhat related to today's topic. It's a tale of 3 city pairs, regional economic growth and rail transit investments, and it compares 3 sets of 2 cities which at one time had similar economic profiles, but whose economic conditions diverged significantly following the investment of rail transit in one of those 2 cities. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Our first speaker will be Alex Iams. He's a commercial development planner at Arlington Economic Development in Arlington County, Virginia. At Arlington Economic Development, Alex tracks local development activity and prepares the economic components of Arlington County sector plans. Since December of last year, he's been the acting assistant director at the Arlington County Department of Environmental Services. And prior to joining Arlington County, he held positions at the Council of Development Finance Agencies, the International Economic Development Council, and the City of Dublin, Ohio. He has a Master's of City and Regional Planning from Ohio State University and a Bachelor's in Philosophy from the University of Washington. Our second speaker today will be Anita Morrison. She's the founding principal of Partners for Economic Solutions and has more than 30 years of economic development consulting experience. During her career, she specialized in public-private partnerships, real estate advisory services, redevelopment strategies, and economic impact analysis. From large cities to small towns, she applies her understanding of real estate economic fundamentals to questions of development, redevelopment, and smart growth. She helps decision makers in the community understand how economics and land use planning interact. Anita has a Master's of Public Policy from the University of Michigan and affiliations with the Urban Land Institute and International Economic Development Council in addition to the APA. And she's been on several ULI Urban Land Institute advisory panels in Little Rock, Arkansas, Patterson, New Jersey, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Salem, Oregon. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to our first presenter, Alex Iams. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Alex Iams. I'm with Arlington Economic Development, and I'm going to talk about Columbia Pike in context to kind of set the stage for Anita's presentation. A lot of you are joining the presentation from out of town, so this will hopefully help you get a feel for the kind of place that it is and the kind of place that it'll become. I thought you might want some visual of who is speaking as well, so I included a photo of myself. Sorry about that. There I am. I'm actually really being honest about my physical fitness, and so this is probably more appropriate after 6 months of fatherhood. About you guys, we have over 600 people registered, and I put the D.C., Maryland, and Virginia folks first, cheating New York and Florida out of the top spots. But it's an impressive collection and really shows the strength of the division. Also included some presentation insurance for myself. We had the space shuttle fly by our office last week, so I couldn't resist sharing it. These were some photos taken by our media manager in our office. So here's Arlington County in the context of the Washington area. Columbia Pike is shown here in the red dotted line coming out from 395 in the Pentagon all the way to the Fairfax County line. And you can see the metro corridors in Arlington County by these dots. Circular dots, Roslyn to Ballston here, and down in what we call the Jefferson-Davis corridor here. This is the Columbia Pike study area. The outer blue line is where a lot of single-family homes are located, and then the interior red lines are the form-based code and neighborhoods plan areas. The dark red line is where we planned for form-based code, which really took shape in about 2005. And the shaded red areas are the neighborhoods plan areas that we're planning for now. So the areas that are in the dark red are really parts of the corridor that are commercial in nature and have kind of a suburban commercial character, whereas the shaded red areas are where a lot of multifamily residential exists. So here you have a comparison between the existing built environment and the Columbia Pike form-based code nodes. So again, those are the dark red lined areas and what we anticipate as build out of those areas. So as you can see under the existing, all of the residential square footage in there has been built since 2005 when the form-based code took effect, and that comes out to about 1,000 units. The remaining square footage is mostly the retail that's there today in the form of the auto-oriented commercial. At build-out, you can see we're anticipating a lot more residential development on the order of 4,400 units and about another 1 million square feet of commercial development that will all be new, contained within the developments taking place in those areas. With the neighborhoods plan, I've changed the scale here. On the previous slide, we were at 10 million square feet at the top. This is 20 million. It just reflects that the neighborhoods plan is a larger area and has some higher-rise buildings in it already of a residential character. So through the neighborhoods plan, we would anticipate adding about 5,000 to 6,000 net new units for the plan that we're talking about today. This is Columbia Pike looking to the east. You can see obviously in the background there the District of Columbia, the Washington Monument, United States Capitol. In the foreground here you see some of the town center development or form-based code area slated for development that is currently in use for things like the Boston Market and things like the Exxon station and McDonald's. Off to the right-hand side of the slide here in the dark red brick, that's one of the first projects that was built under form-based code, the Halstead. And then beyond that in the wood frame, you can see where the Penrose Square and Sienna Park developments were being built. This is just 2 years ago, I believe, is when this was taken. Here's a couple other aerial images of the Pike. again, on the left-hand side, we're looking east, and you can see the Pentagon there just beyond the Sheraton Hotel and the Air Force Memorial. And so Columbia Pike for Arlington really connects the Pentagon and Pentagon City areas to the Fairfax County line, and obviously we care very much about what's going on in between. On the right-hand side, you're looking to the west. Again, you have one of the town center or form-based code areas in the foreground where nothing has been built under the code just yet. And then in the background, you begin to see the transition into the land use and housing study areas where some of this older, more affordable housing stock exists. And then in the background of that picture is Fairfax County. This is the construction of Penrose Square. Penrose is where you can see all of the exposed wood beams, and just to the left of that is a completed project called Sienna Park. This is actually an area where the commercial or form-based code area abuts the neighborhoods plan area. So you can see the contrast between what was an area of parking lots and actually low-scale grocery store, and then beyond that, again, this multifamily, more tree-covered area being the neighborhoods plan. So here's Penrose Square from the ground level. From the front side, we did replace the giant grocery store that was there with a new 60,000 square foot grocery store within the development, and it tapers to the back into a townhouse form off of the north side of the development. And then in the front, you can see the green space, which is yet to be built out, but that will be the Penrose Square itself, where we would anticipate some cultural programming, public art, and really a focal point for this part of the form-based code area. So as I had said, there are several other new projects going on under the form-based code development. The Halstead to the top right was the first project adopted under the form-based code, and you can see there that the existing frontage was integrated with that project. So the project itself actually sits back from the street and connects to what were some historic buildings, and there's some new restaurants and retailers in there now. To the bottom right is Sienna Park, which is the second project that went in under the form-based code, and that's 188 units with a mix of commercial space on the ground and mezzanine levels. It actually has 15,000 square feet of office space mixed in. And to the left-hand side, you can see the 5500 project, which is on the west end of Columbia Pike, and another one of the commercial nodes. And that project, I believe, is 9 or 10 stories, so it's one of the taller ones. We also have some upcoming projects. These aren't the only ones, but one of them will take place on the Rosenthal site, which is currently where there's a Chrysler and Jeep dealership in this area here, and will be replaced by mixed-use 300 units with, again, about 30,000 square feet of retail. On the right-hand side, you have Arlington Mill, which is an existing Arlington County property with a community center on it, and we will replace the community center and add 122 units of committed affordable housing. So we have some areas that are not on the tour because Columbia Pike really still is a work in progress. We have a lot of investment going into streets and sidewalks, but as you can see, we have a long way to go. There's just there's kind of an uneven level of progress all over the Pike as the development occurs, as the county is able to invest more money in transportation to bring all this area together. But this is just a way of showing that it's not all the new projects, and it's going to take a long time for all of this to happen, probably over the course of 30 years. So it is really a long-range planning effort. And just wanted to give you some economic development context for the corridor. Columbia Pike is a primarily residential corridor, a very important one with a lot of people living there who work in our downtowns. However, it doesn't comprise a whole lot of our commercial tax base, and this is just within Columbia Pike itself, where you have 92% of the value in residential and just 8% in the commercial. And you can see why that was from the types of commercial uses that are currently present. And that's changing a little bit, but since we don't anticipate any new office buildings or new hotels going just yet on the Pike, so what we add in commercial will generally be ground floor retail. As for the Arlington County commercial property tax base, most of it resides in the metro corridors. The Roslyn-Ballston corridor and the Jefferson-Davis corridor that comprise of 90% of our commercial property taxes. And then all the other areas combined in Arlington County are 10%. And Columbia Pike comes in about 2%. Another area called Shirlington comes in about 2%. And then there's other retail, other office, other hotel mixed in throughout the county. But you can see we're heavily reliant from a commercially due property tax base on these metro corridors, which are quite substantial areas if you've ever visited Arlington. A lot of high-rise development, a lot of mixing of uses. They're about 50-50 when it comes to the residential commercial mix, and good blend of high-rise development tapering down to the neighborhoods. So I just wanted to show you very quickly again where the Roslyn-Ballston and Jefferson-Davis corridors are in relation to Columbia Pike. This is the Washington area metro system, of course, and this is Roslyn right near the river here, and then on out to Ballston at the western edge of the county. East Falls Church is the last station in Arlington County. And then this is what we call the Jefferson-Davis corridor, and Columbia Pike would be somewhere in this area here. So again, this is just showing where a great deal of the employment within the county exists today and where it will exist in the future. Obviously, Roslyn and Ballston and Jefferson-Davis corridors are where the majority of employment resides, but Columbia Pike holds its own in residential and also holds its own with through to 2040 with these projections in the residential category. However, we plan much more aggressively for commercial development, again, in the metro corridors, with Columbia Pike filling out to become a mid-rise mixed-use corridor. Columbia Pike does play a very important local and starter retail location in Arlington. It has some of the favorite retail establishments in the county, places that people all around the county and all around the region know about and they go to. It also is becoming an option for different community facilities in the ground floor of some of these new buildings. You're seeing on the top right the Arlington Free Clinic, where we have healthcare services for lower income residents in the ground floor of the Halstead project. And again, we do have a wide variety of places to eat and places to go along Columbia Pike. It is one of the most ethnically, culturally diverse corridors in the county and probably in the nation. We have 33 different languages spoken in Arlington Public Schools, and I would assume that many of the same ones are spoken somewhere along Columbia Pike. So this was a little graphic that I put together about the rhythm between the commercial and the residential along Columbia Pike, and I compared it to Connecticut Avenue in Washington, D.C., just to see how the two stacked up. It was part of a conversation we were having at the beginning of the planning process as to whether we needed to add more retail in the residential areas along Columbia Pike, because we obviously already have commercial areas. We're going to continue adding ground floor retail in those commercial areas as projects get built. And then we have residential areas in between them that would not necessarily need the retail. Each one of these little blocks is 0.2 miles. So you can see that just about anywhere you live on Columbia Pike, you're going to have walking access to retail. And one of the priorities for my department was not to dilute the success of what's going to occur, what is occurring in the commercial nodes, and getting good retail concentrations there where people know about and have a sense of place. So this is some of that residential frontage between commercial nodes that I was talking about, and I put in an example that exists today along Columbia Pike called the Alcova Row on the right-hand side. And then obviously we have lots of healthy examples across the river in the district, Connecticut Avenue, U Street Northwest, and Wisconsin Avenue, all having residential frontages between retail areas. So possibly above all, Columbia Pike is an affordable housing resource. It has some of the highest income diversity in Arlington County and maybe anywhere in this region. There's architectural diversity in the housing areas, and that's really what led us to the study that we're talking about today, is that these areas are under pressure just like everywhere else in this region. And so the study was initiated about how to preserve and protect the affordable housing resources that we have. What can we do through development, through incentives, to kind of manage the change that's washing over this corridor, both because of its attractive location and because of broader economic factors affecting the Washington area. I wanted to direct your attention to our website, columbiapikeva.us, where you can find a lot of the same information and more. If you're interested in more information about Columbia Pike, you can go there. And with that, I will turn it over to Anita when she's ready.
Thank you, Alex. This is Anita Morrison from Partners for, here we go, Economic Solutions. And I wanted to start by, let's see if we can get this going. There we are. Okay, I wanted to start by just covering what I was going to talk about. The study that Alex referred to, the land use and housing study, was actually the first element in a new neighborhoods plan for these areas between the commercial nodes. So just to start with the goals associated with that plan, the importance of influencing property owners, how we used market and financial analysis to inform that process, the lessons we learned from the analysis, and then a review of some of the affordable housing tools that are available for helping to preserve affordable housing and transit corridors. So starting off, the neighborhoods plan had a number of goals, 7 goals developed by the community at the outset. And they're here on your screen. They include things like high quality of life, stable neighborhoods, the vibrant mixed-use commercial centers that Alex had shown you, the improved housing stock, pedestrian-friendly multimodal corridors, and the rest. Specifically, we were most focused on the issue of the housing goal, and they termed that to be, improve the existing housing stock and expand housing options to achieve a housing mix that serves diverse households, preserves affordability for current and future residents, and supports the adopted housing goals and targets and the Columbia Pike initiative. So that would be the earlier planning work that was done starting in 2002. So then the community moved forward, and they took that housing goal and got much more specific with some fairly aggressive and ambitious goals or objectives. The first was to retain or replace all of the 60% AMI market affordable units. And let me just step back, and for those of you who are not immersed in affordable housing, explain the jargon. This 60% of AMI means households that have incomes less than 60% of the area, the metropolitan area, median income. So for a family of 4, that's about $62,000, $63,000 in the Washington area. Market affordable units means that these are private market units with no government subsidies attached to them, but by virtue of the rents that they charge, they are affordable to these households at 60% of AMI. So we often refer to these market affordable units as MARCs. So within the Columbia Pike corridor, we are looking through the plan to replace about 2,900 MARCs at the 60% of AMI level. And then at more of the workforce level, at 80% of AMI, the goal is, or the objective is, to retain or replace 1/2 of the existing MARCs, and that's about 1,600 units. They also are seeking to retain and replace all committed affordable housing units that we call CAVs. Those are ones with government subsidies that require and commit their units to be affordable for up to 30 years. Then we're also looking to retain and create new affordable home ownership units, largely condominiums within this corridor, and then to provide opportunities for households below 40% of AMI through subsidies and or construction of new committed units specific to that income level. One of the primary motivations has been some of the work that's been done recently by the Center for Neighborhood Technology, as well as the Urban Land Institute's Terwilliger Center for Workforce Housing. And that's looking at the combined cost of housing and transportation and looking for affordability for that combined cost. So traditionally, lower and less expensive housing on the far edges of the area had been the backup resource for lower income households that couldn't afford close-in housing. It turns out that when you combine the costs of their housing and the transportation, it's actually more expensive and a higher burden than some compact development that we see in closer-in neighborhoods where the housing might be more expensive, but they have access to good quality transit at affordable prices. So, of course, overall, the goal is to help reduce the burden on the household's budget and help them be more self-sustaining. So within Arlington, about 27% of the region's housing, of the county's housing is marks. There are about 5,900 committed affordable units, but almost as many marks that are affordable at the 60% of AMI level, and then another 11,000 units that are affordable at incomes between 60 and 80% of AMI. But they're all under a growing pressure to increase rents as a result of the growing demand, the population increase within the Washington area, and then desire for more accessible urban kinds of housing, and this corridor is no exception. So overarching, as we started this study and the plan, the focus was on achieving the affordable housing goals, and that means convincing property owners to participate. Virginia is a property rights state, and in fact most of the nation has similar kinds of requirements that that the property developers and the property owners have to opt into the programs, and so you have to provide them with incentives that will encourage participation. And we use market and financial analysis to help frame the incentives that would respond to the financial needs of the developers and the property owners that would allow them to, in fact, still make a profit while meeting the public goal of providing affordable housing. It turns out that it also is very helpful in influencing the community input and the evaluation of alternative development patterns. Most residents don't start off with a predisposition to increase density, but once they understand the connection between the density and their ability to support the new retail space and to provide affordable housing, then the conversation shifts and the discussion is somewhat different by virtue of having this information provided. So our market analysis is started with a detailed assessment of the current inventory. We looked at conditions, the rent trends, and the market pressures. We found, of course, a great divergence between the area median income, that measure of affordability, and the growth in rents, the change in rents in the corridor, and that's a disturbing trend. Even more disturbing were the specific examples where we had typically mid-rise developments that were emptied out of their tenants, renovated, and then released at rents that were 40 or 50% higher than they had previously been asking. And so that resulted in displacement of a number of tenants who then were not able to find other housing in the same area. And that trend seems likely to accelerate over the next decade, particularly with the introduction of streetcar, which will supplement what is already outstanding bus service. So the financial analysis demonstrated that higher density development creates new value, and that some of that value can be captured for affordable housing. And our role in doing the financial analysis was to quantify the value and compare that to the cost of providing the affordable housing. What is the developer giving up in making a commitment to long-term affordability as opposed to building a market rate unit? So the process involved initially meeting with the property owners to understand their goals and expectations and plans. Columbia Pike has a number of longtime families that own a great deal of the multifamily housing within the corridor, some from dating back to the 50s and even earlier. Their goals typically are to continue to own housing and to rent it out over the long term, so that starts to influence some of the alternatives that were available to us. So we built financial models and then confirmed the inputs with a roundtable of local developers to make sure that we were responsive and reflective of the local development economics. And then the results from that analysis and the lessons we learned helped to shape the planning process. So Dover Cole & Partners led the plan, and their designers and planners were influenced by the lessons we learned and the direction we could give them about the need for additional density and some of the factors that influence the land use decisions within the corridor. And then we also used this to, again, set the framework for the community as they discuss their vision for the corridor. So we used the financial analysis and applied it against 9 prototypical sites. These were sites chosen along the corridor with different rent levels, construction types, and market types in order to sort of represent the range of options or the range of properties available on the Pike. And Dover Cole then developed 3 scenarios for each of the sites. The first was primarily renovation of existing units, possibly some small amounts of infill. In the second scenario, we had partial redevelopment of the property. And in the third scenario, we had complete redevelopment of the property. And the goal then was to compare what were the impacts or what were the different performance of each scenario financially. So this is just the before and after shots of Greenbrier Apartments, which is an aging garden apartment complex, affordable at 60% of AMI, and then the opportunities for redevelopment as a higher quality and a higher density of development on the right. So the lessons we learned included, of course, as I already mentioned, the increasing demand is driving up rents at a rapid rate. But we really learned that it was much more difficult to redevelop existing housing than to redevelop low-density commercial uses. So much of what's happened already in the mixed-use commercial nodes was replacement of strip shopping centers, or in the Rosenthal case, a used car or a car dealer. When you're looking at aging commercial centers, typically the density is lower. They've sort of run through their useful life. They're now recognized as obsolete space, so rents are lower. And so the cost of the land and the opportunity costs of development are much lower than coming in to take out an existing apartment building that may be 20, 30 units per the acre and is all fully leased and generating income and a good return to their owners. So as we looked at the numbers, essentially we found that, at least on Columbia Pike, that redevelopment is financially feasible only if it replaces each existing unit with 3 or 4 new units. so that suggests a real step up in density. As I mentioned, much of what's there is 24, 28, 32 units per acre. And so to triple that, we're getting into very high densities. The other critical issue, as we went through the financial analysis, was just the economics of building height and building construction type. So much of what we're seeing now is low-rise wood frame construction that can go up to 5 stories, and in some cases 6 with a hybrid of development. That has a cost in Arlington of around $100 to $110 a square foot. When you move into the higher mid-rise development that's all concrete, you can move up to about 10 stories, but the costs are increasing by 50 to 60%. And then when you move to high-rise construction, those costs can go up 80 to 90% when you're involved in steel construction. So that has some real implications for the likely urban form that we're going to see, at least in the foreseeable future, until rents are much higher than they currently are. It's unlikely that we will see high-rise development along the Pike. That's been exacerbated by the issue of parking costs. So if the surface parking lot per parking space tends to cost about $5,000 a space, by the time you go above ground in the structure, it's $14,000 a space, and below ground it can be $22,000 to $34,000 a space. So you can see that the cost of the parking involved with the project has, in some cases gone up 5-fold, and that will have a dramatic impact on the feasibility of your development. So it was very important to us that we avoid setting minimum parking standards along the Pike that would be in excess of what the market would demand. And so we're looking for a real reduction in parking ratios so as to bring down the cost of development and eliminate some of the burdens associated with car traffic and parking in the area. We clearly found that higher density development does reduce the cost of land per unit, and that then gives us the ability to provide a cross-subsidy for affordable units. And some of our developer partners brought us examples that showed that, in fact, we could achieve up to 95 units per acre with wood frame 4-story construction with above-ground structured parking, and that with one level of below-ground parking, we can get as high as 110 or even 120 units per acre. So there are some options there that we're taking advantage of in planning for Pike development so that we can achieve the the needed replacement units. So one of the key elements of the plan as we look at affordable housing is the use of bonus density. So essentially going forward, we'll be developing a form-based code which will allow much greater densities than currently exist on the Pike under current zoning. But in order to opt into using the form-based code and achieving those higher densities, we will be requiring any developer to commit long-term affordable units at 60% of AMI. At this point, the ratios we're talking about is that 20% of the net new units created above the current zoning would be required to be provided for 30 years or more at 60% of AMI. And if the developer were to choose to renovate existing apartments rather than to build all new, then 25% of the number of net new units would have to be preserved within the existing apartments. But I should caution that these numbers and these ratios are very specific to Columbia Pike and where it stands in the market in terms of rents and development costs and land costs, and would not necessarily be directly transferable to another location. So in looking at the whole range of affordable housing costs, housing tools, of course, the federal resources have been the leading funding source for affordable housing for many decades. The workhorse in the industry is really the low-income housing tax credit, but there are also historic tax credits and new markets tax credits that can help reduce the cost of development and thereby the required rent. And then, of course, housing choice vouchers, old Section 8 vouchers, are an important resource as well. But on the local government side, we see communities committing their community development block grant dollars and home dollars that they get from the federal government, but also combining those with local funds. So in Arlington, the Affordable Housing Initiatives Fund, AHIF, is funded from CDBG, from home, from repayment of past loans, but primarily from the general fund, from property taxes, because there is a consensus within the community that affordable housing is an important priority for the county. In other communities, we've seen the use of recordation taxes or property taxes, so a percentage of those taxes generated when a property changes hands would be committed to a housing production fund that would then be used for financing affordable housing developments. The other important resource you always want to look for is whether there is available land. So Alex pointed out the Arlington Mill project on Columbia Pike, where the existing community center is being replaced through a joint development, both a new center and a housing tower that will include affordable housing units. And because the county could put its land in at no cost to that development, it made it much more financially feasible. And then there's also land owned by faith-based institutions. This is First Baptist Church of Clarendon, which is in the Roslyn-Ballston corridor, and they elected to make available their large lot and tear down most of their existing facilities in exchange for much replacement with a much smaller set of church facilities and then a major housing development that has a large share of affordable units within it. So again, the church made a commitment that their mission required reaching out to the poor and helping to support low-income families and help them stay in Arlington, so they made their land available at a reasonable price. So in Arlington, the county has no redevelopment and housing authority of its own. It relies largely on affordable housing developers that the county is actually a partner in, both the Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing and the Arlington Housing Corporation. And their ability to buy existing housing and sites is important as a resource to preserve existing units and develop new units for affordable housing. Transfer of development rights is something that probably started most with preserving historic sites and or agricultural land, where you take the right to develop new housing or new office space or whatever from the sending site, and you transfer that right to build those units or that space to a receiving site in another location, not affected by the historic preservation, historic designation, or an agricultural goal of preserving agricultural land. In this case, we find that the receiving site will pay the sending site for those development rights based on an analysis of what the land price would be at the receiving site. But it also depends on the demand and supply of TDRs, of the rights that are being traded. And so you have to be very careful that you have a sufficient number of receiving sites to generate enough demand for the supply of TDRs that's created by your policy to allow TDRs for either preservation of historic properties or creation of affordable housing. Tax abatement and tax exemptions can be a tool to reduce the landlord's operating costs in exchange for providing committed affordable units. Excuse me. At a minimum, you'd want to be sure that your tax assessment policy, which is often set at the state level, will assess the properties and will assess affordable housing properties based on their real cash flow and not on a hypothetical highest and best use, because those higher property taxes, the higher property value, and then the resulting higher property taxes will strain the operating budget of the affordable housing development, making it much more difficult to provide and maintain affordable housing. In a number of cities, including Denver, where the Urban Land Conservancy is at work, we're seeing pooled investment funds, which are a pool of investment dollars from government, philanthropic organizations, nonprofit organizations, and lending institutions. They put their money together and then make loans for housing development. In this case, the lenders are repaid first, so they have the lowest risk. The local government funds are repaid last, and they carry the highest risk. But by pooling the dollars together, you've reduced the risk to the private lenders and thereby increased their willingness to participate and expanded the number and the types of private lenders that will participate in funding of affordable housing. So that's been very effective along transit lines in the Denver area and in San Francisco and other locations. Community land trusts are somewhat similar, where you acquire the land and or buildings, and they're held in long-term ownership by nonprofits. That then allows home buyers to purchase the house but not the land. They lease the land at a very low rate, and that brings down their blended cost of housing and makes home ownership more affordable for low-income households. It then also preserves that affordability for future owners. When the current owner sells their property, the land then stays with the nonprofit and is available to help subsidize the next homeowner. And it can also be used for multifamily rental housing as well. Tax increment financing is a very popular tool in economic development circles. It commits incremental property tax revenues to fund the public infrastructure improvements that support new development. In this case, we'd be looking at mixed income housing. The only issue is the scale of the new dollars that are created from the new development and the increase in property value. And then the concern from the local jurisdiction standpoint of whether the new development is actually something that wouldn't have occurred otherwise. We typically have a but-for clause in tax increment financing that says, except for the provision of tax increment financing, the project would not move ahead, and therefore the taxes would not be available to the local government. To the extent that these properties would otherwise be developed with market rate housing, we just have to respond to the government's concern that you're diverting future funds away from basic government functions like schools and fire and police to focus on affordable housing. And so that tension's a little harder than in places where you're talking about a new project that clearly would not have taken place otherwise without the advantage and the incentive of tax increment financing. Fee waivers are another technique. It may not be an actual waiver of an impact fee. In fact, a lot of local governments pay the impact fee on behalf of the property the affordable housing development because it's not legal to exempt anyone from those fees. But they'll take housing funds and either grant them to the housing developer or pay the fees directly. And then there are other opportunities to reduce some of the local government service fees, say for water and sewer. But at least Arlington County has taken the position that they prefer to see greater transparency in their subsidizing of affordable housing and would rather not reduce the fees for basic services, but rather increase the funding to an affordable housing developer that will allow them to pay regular fees like every other property. One of the most important tools, I think, is expedited approvals, and that is because the development process and the developers place a high value on a reduced time and reduced uncertainty in the development approval process. They need to know and have a good understanding of what will be approved and how long it will take and what they will need to do in exchange for the approvals. And the form-based code that was first applied in the mixed-use nodes and now will be expanded to the multifamily neighborhoods provides that kind of certainty. This is a whole different session that you need to go through on form-based code, but essentially what it does is it moves away from zoning based on density and FARs and moves it instead to a focus on the building form. So how close to the street does the building need to extend? How does it relate to and function with the public space? And then what height you would allow. And so that's been used very successfully on Columbia Pike and is part of why we've seen some of the new development in the mixed-use nodes, because the process that the community went through in planning the corridor and adopting the form-based code gave pre-approval essentially to the developer's plans, and that helped them move through the process more expeditiously. Typically, a project that complies with form-based code can be approved administratively or with a much lower level of scrutiny and much less time and uncertainty in the process. So that's really a key benefit for any development. So essentially all of these affordable housing incentives then need to be tailored to the local conditions. They need to reflect and respond to the property owner's goals, their resources, and their willingness to partner with government. It depends on the rents, the land, and the development costs, the availability of sites, and the available governmental and nonprofit resources that can be used to help support affordable housing. So with that, I think we'll open it up for questions. I think Shana was going to collect questions from you all.
Great. Thank you, Anita. The first question may actually be for Alex. Are there any historic districts along the area of Columbia Pike, and if so, how do they impact the overall plan?
Okay, I'll take that one. The answer is absolutely yes. There are a number of historic housing resources along Columbia Pike. We saw in one of my slides Buckingham Village, which is a very large complex with a lot of very important historic characteristics. So I might turn it over to Anita in just a moment, but what I would say is that it complicated the land use planning process because, and by complicated I don't mean that in a bad way, but just it complicated the discussion because in a lot of these cases we were looking at how can we modify the existing housing inventory that's there. How can we change it entirely if something new was desired on a site? And so obviously with that we needed to be conscious of the historic resources and working closely with the historic preservation planners and the community to understand what was out there and what our options were on from site to site. And so it kind of led to some tricky planning on a few of the sites.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mentioned the 7 goals that the plan was being led by, and some of those included creating better relationship between the buildings and the street, and creating a more walkable community. And in some cases, that ran counter to some of the historic properties at the edges of Columbia Pike itself. And so there have been some compromises relative to redeveloping some frontage adjacent to these mixed-use nodes in order to achieve a higher density and development. But there's a lot of additional strain, I think, within the planning process because of the issues of long-term affordability and historic preservation, and trying to achieve the urban form that people were seeking. So we have been looking at transfer of development rights in order to help preserve some of those historic properties. One of the hopes is that by virtue of there being smaller units and older units, then that they might stay in the market affordable category a little longer, just because they're not as big and modern as newly constructed apartments. It's actually still a work in progress at this point.
Okay. I have 2 sort of related questions, and so I'll say them both at once. Andrew asks, Anita, perhaps you covered this topic in your presentation, but what efforts are being taken to combat the pressure to increase rents as it pertains to the cap building height limit within DC proper? And Brian asked, how do you ensure that affordable stays affordable in the future? How are rents monitored to ensure compliance?
Okay. So I think the long-term goal is to convert marks to CAFs so that you have a contractual obligation to maintain affordable rents and to specifically lease to people at 60% or lower, 60% of AMI or lower. And so there is an annual reporting process on tenants and assuring that they meet those income levels, similar to what's done with low-income housing tax credit reporting each year. I don't think that anyone has an answer on how do you constrain rent growth in private market units as demand increases. You can increase supply to some extent, but we really don't have, short of rent control, which is not proved to be an ideal market solution, we really don't have tools that allow us to restrain rent growth, except in cases where we either have a contract, a subsidy contract, or it's public ownership of the land, or nonprofit ownership of the project.
Okay. And Anita, did you say the cap, when it's committed, there's a time limit? Is it a 30-year or?
Typically, it's 30 years. Arlington is in fact seeking longer periods of affordability. Now that we've gone through the first round of 30-year subsidies and found, you then have to do it all over again. People are hoping to postpone that, for 50 years or something. But typically, it's a 30-year kind of commitment.
Okay. The next question is from Lee. The density bonuses are great incentives, but can obviously be problematic if building costs per square foot are much higher with taller construction. Does this only work on larger sites? Is there something of a sweet spot in terms of the height, number of units in order to make this financially feasible on a small site?
Well, on a larger site that has the right dimensions to support an efficient garage, in particular, we can get, with a 5-story building or 5 stories over a concrete podium, we can get relatively high densities, but you're right that there are limitations on your ability to use those on small properties and on properties that are sort of irregularly shaped. So we're having problems in some small properties in demonstrating that we can in fact replace 3 to 1. And in those cases, what may happen is that the developers will just decide that the most effective, the most economical approach for them is to renovate what they have. Maybe take out a few structures, redevelop the parking lot or something. But there are cases where we just are not able to achieve the full replacement that we really need at 3 or 4 to 1. So in that case, you might use bonus density to help with a portion of the cost of providing affordable housing, and then you turn to all these other tools to bring down the cost with direct investments and low-income housing tax credits and the like.
Okay. Heidi asks, when granting bonus density, are there any requirements that bonus units be a mix of sizes with different numbers of bedrooms, or might Arlington end up with all bonus units being the smallest in that particular development?
Typically, the requirement is that the development, that the affordable units have the same mix of number of bedrooms as the total project. In fact, Arlington, though, negotiates with the individual developers to get more 2-bedroom units and rather than efficiencies, and then will actually help to pay the cost to build 3-bedroom units because they're at such a premium and are not very available within the inventory. But generally there are requirements that either it's the same mix or it's at least the same square footage of the same percentage of the square footage of the project. So if it was 20% of the net new units, you might term that as 20% of the net new square feet in order to get larger units.
Okay. Maya writes that she's a graduating Duke University graduate student, so congratulations, Maya.
Yeah.
And that for the past year she's been working with a local MPO on the same issue in North Carolina related to rail investments planned in the Triangle area. She said, both Anita and Alex have mentioned form-based codes as a mechanism for preserving affordable housing near transit. Was form-based codes initially just part of the planning process, or was it put in place for a specific issue related to transit-oriented development? Maybe, Alex, you want to chime in on this one?
Sure, I'll start. And just to provide a little bit more background about the form-based code in Arlington, before the form-based code, we weren't having any activity whatsoever along Columbia Pike. So initially, it was not intended as an affordable housing tool. It was intended as a development incentive in and of itself. And so, in fact, with the form-based code developments in the commercial areas, there is no affordable housing requirement on those projects. So really, those projects were intended to jumpstart the area in whatever way possible. It was also meant to be planned in tandem with transportation. We had closely linked land use planning and transportation in every corridor in Arlington. So certainly here, in order to build the transportation system that we wanted and have the land use plan that we wanted and link them up, the form-based code was compatible with having the densities necessary to have full trains and full buses and have a functional community as far as getting people to work and getting them to shopping and getting them where they want to go. So it really turned into more of an affordable housing tool for us in the course of this project as a way to continue what we started with the form-based code in the commercial areas, but change it a little bit in that, yes, we're still looking for a similar kind of build-out, but this time, we're dealing with a very critical affordable housing resource already, and we just wanted to be mindful of that and use some of the additional density to leverage affordability.
So there's nothing,
Anita?
There's nothing inherent in the form-based code that makes it special to affordable housing. It is very effective in terms of expediting the approval and reducing the uncertainty. So it is an incentive for every kind of development. But in our case, it was a conscious choice that you could only achieve the higher density, and you could only take advantage of the expedited approvals in form-based code by opting into providing affordable housing. So that was the real impetus for it. But I think besides just wanting to be an incentive to development, it's also a much higher quality of development. I think when you're done, the nature, the relationships of the buildings to the public spaces are more acceptable or more desirable and more supportive of a walkable community. And if you get the opportunity to see some of the presentations that contrast form-based code with traditional Euclidean zoning, I think you'd be very impressed that what we thought we were going to get under Euclidean zoning, wasn't what we really wanted. It didn't create the kind of public spaces that we were hoping for, and so form-based code is much more prescriptive in that sense of saying this is the build-to line and this is your minimum and maximum heights, and you have to make some variation in the facades in order to keep it interesting, but otherwise then it's left open to the creativity of the architect and the developer.
Jonathan asks, pertaining to the issue of transfer of development rights, you mentioned the need for strong sending areas. Does the existing stock have unused density, or will you need to rezone to add density to create value to the transfer?
In some cases, there is unused density. It's generally not enough to make the difference, and so it's likely that there would be a zoning. There would be additional density associated with those properties for the express purpose of transferring and selling and transferring the rights to another site. So it started off, I think, in the initial years where you would be at a density, say, of 10 units per acre, and the zoning would allow you to be at 24, and so there was a big difference between what existed and what could be developed in a historic district. Now, in this case, they're pretty well built close to the maximum existing zoning, and so it would be an award of additional development rights specifically for the purpose of transferring them to another site.
Paul asks, has the county considered or used an inclusionary housing requirement, i.e. requiring all new residential development above a size threshold to provide a percentage of affordable dwelling units in a project?
Well, that's not it's not legal in Virginia. One of the issues is that Virginia is a Dillon rule state that says localities can do only what the state explicitly authorizes them to do, and the state has never authorized the localities to do inclusionary zoning. So the bonus density has some of the same flavor of inclusionary zoning, but it has to be tied explicitly to the new value and the new development capacity created by the bonus density, so that you can't just say everybody must build 10% affordable units. You have to increase their zoning envelope to allow them to build more units, and then a portion of those can be required to be affordable in order to participate or to take advantage of the bonus density.
Okay. Richard asks, was there any neighborhood opposition to this 60% AMI housing goals?
Alex, I have not heard opposition. It is an unusual community in the sense that there is a lot of support and appreciation for the diversity that exists now for households that range from 20 to 120% of AMI, and that was an explicit decision by the community as they entered into the planning process to try to preserve some of that population diversity. So, whether you get to an individual homeowner, that may be opposed to having affordable housing near them, I think that generally the community had accepted it. There was some feeling within the community that too much of the market affordable units are concentrated on the western end of the Pike and not as much on the eastern end, where the units are typically more expensive. And so there was some explicit goal that they wanted to see the affordable units dispersed along the corridor, but I didn't hear any real direct opposition to.
No, and I think that speaks to the place that Columbia Pike starts from. Everybody who lives in the Columbia Pike corridor knows that it's an incredible resource for affordable housing. And so when there has been planning projects associated with Columbia Pike, it's kind of baked into the cake that affordable housing will be part of the desired outcome. So we really didn't hear much opposition about that at all. There were just a lot of curiosity and questions about how it was going to be managed, and what was being planned for as far as heights and densities, and was it going to be consistent with what's already planned in between the residential areas and what we planned before. So it was kind of, since the community was okay with what was planned back in 2005, and that was actually had a lot of grassroots support, this one, it went through, I think, a lot easier because that project had paved the way, and again, everybody understands that the Pike, has quite a mix of incomes and housing price points.
And it probably helped that much of what was being proposed for new affordable housing would be in the context of mixed income housing, so that it would be, 10 to 20% of the units, whereas the rest would be market rate units, which would actually be, in some cases, a step up in the socioeconomic characteristics of a community, just the addition of those new units.
John asks, specifically, the newly built projects, Penrose, Halstead, Sienna Park on Columbia Pike, what's the difference between the rental rates for a two-bedroom apartment at market rate versus the assisted housing? I think, John, you'll be surprised how expensive our housing is here.
Yeah,
Alex?
Sure, I can speak to the rental rates. I don't have them in front of me, but if I was to make an estimate for a two-bedroom in one of those projects, I would have to say they're probably a minimum of $2,500. Does that sound right, Anita?
Probably. These are very high-end for Columbia Pike. Yeah, they're on the luxury end of the rent spectrum. An affordable rent for a two-bedroom unit would probably be on the order of, say, $1,300. So there's, in most places, as distinct from these luxury developments, the disparity was about, I want to say, maybe $500 a month, $500 to $700 a month between market rate and affordable at 60% of AMI.
Yeah, but for a lot of the projects that were already sitting there that are market rates, the differences weren't nearly as much. But with these new projects, the rents are coming in not too far off of what rents have been in the metro corridors, and they've been able to fill up the buildings.
Okay, we've had a couple more questions just about the plans for Columbia Pike in general that relate to shade and tree cover and community facilities, and there's actually, I don't know if we mentioned it, but a streetcar plan for Columbia Pike, and a lot of transportation improvements as well as all of the redevelopment. Alex, do you want to provide a sense of how, the county plans to preserve and enhance the natural resources in the area?
Sure. I think the overall point is that change was coming to Columbia Pike one way or another, and we could have it be unmanaged and have it happen under existing zoning, not really upgrade the transportation system, just kind of do business as usual on community facilities. But instead, we really have a comprehensive package where we're looking at it from in all these different respects. Like you said, there's the streetcar that's coming. We're doing street work improvements along the Pike right now to widen sidewalks, to put in new turn lanes, new median islands to make pedestrian crossings more safe. New form-based code projects would require tree coverage on the street front, and the new projects do have them. The trees are young right now, so they haven't quite grown in yet. But if it's anything like development we've had other parts of the county, that it will grow in, and it'll look pretty nice. As far as the facilities and natural resources, the Arlington Mill Community Center is going to be a really nice building when it's done. It's obviously replacing the older community center. And we've been able to get some community facilities and ground floor retail like the Arlington Free Clinic. We do have a library along Columbia Pike, and we attempted to relocate that a couple of years ago, but the community liked it just where it was, and so that'll stay. And as far as the parks piece, there's a lot of great stream corridors in South Arlington, and those intersect with Columbia Pike, so you see a lot of bike riders and walkers joggers using those. And then we've been kind of trying to do the parks piece, like with Penrose Square, where you're looking at more urban park space rather than traditional suburban park development. So plazas, little places for markets and places to interact. And that kind of stuff already goes on Columbia Pike, but more often than not, they may use a parking lot for it. Right? So now we're going to have some nicer spaces to do that, and we already do. So yeah, it's all coming together. It's all changing, and people, have been patient, and will have to continue to be patient because it's going to be a long process.
And there are requirements under the form-based code that the private developments have to provide some private open space within their developments as well.
Next question is from Lenore. In the 1960s, I toured Reston, Virginia, and Columbia, Maryland as, quote, state-of-the-art planned communities. How have these cities fared over the years relative to their affordable housing value, and how does their experience fit into the current dense housing along the transit corridor planning efforts, I'm assuming in Columbia Pike and across the nation? Anita, you may have some perspective on that question.
I think, both Reston and Columbia have flourished. They are now in the stages of refitting to try to create even more walkability and, in some cases, more density. So downtown Columbia is being redesigned, and with a move away from the parking lots and into more structured parking and a greater mix of residential and commercial space. And Reston has done the same thing with their town center. I don't honestly know about the specifics of affordable housing in Reston and in Columbia. And Columbia, I know, explicitly provided for a mix of multifamily and single-family development in order to have a range of rental opportunities available to future residents, and I expect that some of those were committed affordable units that I expect have probably been extended through multiple renewals of their contracts. That I can't really answer the question from direct experience.
Okay. Gordon asks, form-based codes do not necessarily include residential density limitations. Were density limitations introduced in order to facilitate the transfer of development rights?
No, that's there are no density limitations within form-based code. He's absolutely right. It doesn't relate to densities. It's not defined as densities, but and we haven't gotten to the details of how to make the transferable development rights work within the context of form-based code. But I expect it will. Yeah, it probably will be expressed in terms of a number of units and then an average assumed square footage per unit as part of the creation of rights that are available to be transferred to other sites.
Daniel asks, in an era of declining incomes and increased housing costs, is there rent control? I think you addressed this earlier, Anita, saying that our state legislature doesn't allow us to do things like this. I don't know if you want to elaborate a little more.
Well, I think the long-term experience with rent control has been problematic because of the failure of landlords to continue to maintain the properties in good condition over their long lifespan when constrained by rent control. So it was not really, it was thrown out and considered as one of the tools we looked at for the plan, but it really wasn't seriously considered because it would have required state legislative approval, and that was unlikely. But I think it's probably not the first choice. As an economist, that would not be the approach I would take.
Okay, I think Anita, you and Alex may have an answer to this next question. What types of commercial businesses are you seeing interested in being successful within typical mixed-use development? And I think, Anita, maybe you can speak a little bit more broadly. Arlington's experience with mixed use and location and economic conditions is quite different than doing mixed use in, Fairfax County or some more very much more suburban, second-tier suburban jurisdictions in the National Capital Region. So I'm guessing, Wes, maybe your question had some stem from those different conditions and other parts of the country were doing mixed uses in quite a different context.
Yeah, I can start on that one. As I was talking about during the presentation, the majority of our office and hotel activity exists in the metro corridors. So in this corridor, we really are looking for community serving retail and ground floor uses, and would only really expect to see some of that mezzanine level kind of 10 to 15 person firm level office activity, and we did get some of that in the Sienna Park development. There are a couple of other sites along the Pike corridor that could be amenable to office development or had some interest in actually hotel development, particularly once the transportation system is upgraded. But right now, the Pike is kind of going through a succession. It started as this corridor with the auto-oriented retail with the apartments, multifamily apartments in between. Now we're seeing the mixed-use development with the residential over retail, and I would expect as that continues to happen, we'll get our first office building and our first hotel within the next 5 or 10 years. But right now, it's kind of establishing itself as a market. It's kind of in a growth progression.
Certainly elsewhere within Arlington, you have very successful mixed-use developments that include a shopping mall and a hotel and major office space as well as residential space. I think with mixed-use development, essentially there's nothing magic about the fact that it's mixed-use. Your ability to be a successful business within a mixed-use development relates back to the same criteria you would use as an office tenant looking at any site. So or a retail tenant looking at any other site. you get some advantages from having the 24-hour environment of a mixed-use development and for having some built-in market from the office tenants or the residents who then shop in the stores or eat in the restaurants. But you still have to depend on the wider market, and so it's the nature of your location and the nature of the market around you and where your competition is as to what kinds of businesses will be most successful within a mixed-use development. I think the easy answer on the retail is that it probably favors restaurants and food more heavily than other types of retail, but that's probably a gross overstatement relative to the wide diversity of mixed-use developments and what's been successful within them. But we do see quite a few lifestyle centers with entertainment and restaurants and retail and housing developed collectively.
Great. That was actually, I believe, the last question that's come in today. So I just, on behalf of the Economic Development Division, like to thank both Anita and Alex for spending their early afternoon here on Friday with us, and of course all of our attendees. And Brittany, would you like to close us out?
Sure. Well, thank you again, Anita and Alex, for the presentation, and also Shana for hosting our session today. And for the attendees who are still with us, I'm just going to go over how to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast. So if you just want to stay here for a moment, I'll switch over to my screen and we'll go through that. All right, well, first off, to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM and select today's date, which is Friday, April 27th, and then select today's webcast, which is Preserving Affordable Housing in a Transit Corridor. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. Also, we are recording today's session, so you will be able to find a recording of this webcast along with a PDF of the presentation at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. And this does conclude today's session. I want to thank everyone again for attending.